probably 3 different businesses
Hmm.
around D&I and what can they do.
Okay.
2 big colleges and a corporation.
Really? Okay. I think it's interesting to always remember people to add the equity part. Otherwise, diversity and inclusion really doesn't hold teeth.
Absolutely.
You literally, personally, we can do without diversity. We can do without inclusion if there's no equity.
Right.
If you don't have a seat at the table, it's almost
Absolutely.
like beyond having a seat at the table. It's really being able to speak your mind, get a job. And I guess because everything is just based on assumption, it's been a weird couple of weeks where,
oh my God,
where your beliefs are challenged, your character is challenged, and I'm having issues with the group that says if you don't follow what we think, then we're going to dismiss you 100%.
Yeah, I don't like that
makes
either.
no sense. There's no room for not necessarily disagreement. Well, and see, I'm torn by it because you want to hold the line and you want to do what you believe is the right thing, and yet on the flip side, I don't think vandalism and hitting people over the head and all that is correct either. So
I don't either. I don't think violence in any part of it is a solution.
Right.
It obviously gets attention, but I don't think it's the attention that anyone wants, because part of this cause is based on violence, and so if that is minimized, it would. I think it would be a whole lot better.
Yeah.
I think people can be heard if that was further minimized. But again, in order to be heard, you got to have a seat at the table, and it's got to be an open-minded seat. I don't have an issue with any conversation of agreement or disagreement because, freedom of speech and everybody, but we've got to hear, and you've got to come into a situation, I think, in any of this, even as I've talked to corporations around the why. And it's interesting because I've turned opportunities down because they can't explain to me the why.
Right.
Because I'm not interested in going and talk to a group of executives or leaders, and diversity and inclusion is not part of your business model.
Wow.
So I'm just putting a Band-Aid over a feel-good Band-Aid over a situation that educates, and we're not going to go apply anything, and it doesn't mean anything, and it's not a pulse in our organization. It doesn't align with our value system. I'm not interested. You can have somebody else do that.
All right. Well, I'm Ken Harris. We are here leveraging the power of people on today, June 7th, 2020. I am the Chief Strategist for Talented Strategies. I'm here with the illustrious, the stupendous, the magnanimous Nick Dillion of Believe University, Believe Mastermind, Believe Giant Building, Believe everything. He's the Believe coach for everything and everyone.
That's right.
So we're going to kind of change the tenor of us meeting every week and really talk about news and commentary and those types of things. Kind of do some First Amendment things. Some of you will agree, some of you will disagree, some of you will become enraged, some of you may not. But I think there are some things that are clearly missing from the conversation. And so many people complain about, oh, you're just saying that because. And I think we have a generation that negates what you say based on disagreeing with one thing that you say. And so I think that's unfortunate because now we've dismissed generation upon generation of good quality know-how, ancestors who have fought and died to get you to the place where you can speak freely. And now we're at a point where being politically correct has overtaken an individual's right to freedom of speech. And I think it's really what you said about it. It's about being able to say what you believe and sit at the table and listen. But we need concrete rules. This unilateral defund the police makes no sense to me. Whether I have a history of law enforcement or not, it just doesn't make any sense, because now we're going to make a community unsafe.
Right. And
that's not an assumption of an African-American community being, or minority community being safe. I mean, all of America.
Right. And I think a lot of these last couple of weeks, in addition to our COVID-19 that interestingly has taken a backseat to all of this, but our numbers are kind of all over the board.
Right.
But I think what's interesting here is we got a lot of emotion speaking.
True.
And we got a lot of stuff. We got a lot of speaking. You got a lot of emotion going, and at the end of the day, my condolences goes out to certainly George Floyd's family and any of the families who's lost loved ones as part of this type of history in our society. I think when all of this kind of tempers itself, we have to have, and it's interesting because I'm slowly seeing a little bit of acknowledgement. I thought it was interesting to hear the NFL come with a totally new statement most recently. I think it was the commissioner of the NFL who has pretty much acknowledged, we failed. We didn't do what we were supposed to do, and we acknowledge that this exists and we want to do better. And I think first and foremost, certainly from a African-American male standpoint, and every organization standpoint, I think first for us, and I'm speaking for me, is I believe that we need first acknowledgement. Acknowledgement starts to allow people to communicate.
Acknowledge what?
Acknowledge meaning we've got to acknowledge that from the last 400 years, there has been racial inequality. There has been discriminatory practices.
Sure.
We've got to be willing to acknowledge that existed, and that has existed, which is why it is systemic. It's existed in a lot of our systems, from healthcare to education to corporations to government to, and to policing.
Now, what I'm going to do this week is play devil's advocate, so I don't want anybody going, "Hey, you believe that because you said that."
That's okay.
But I heard a very interesting comment about systemic racism, and if you think about it, it's actually correct. And I think what happens is we become so narrow-minded that we reject outside information that we can add to what we already know and then build on it. So systemic racism was, and this is an argument someone used, was removed when statutorily it became illegal to discriminate. So if you think about housing, if you think about education, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, you think about 1968, Civil Rights Act. I guess it's my turn for the phone to go off. Civil Rights Act, all those things, housing, they removed those from the statutes. So the systemic racism that was there, gone. Hiring practices, all those things, diversity, inclusion, all the corporations. If you really think about the definition of systemic racism, it's gone. It's no longer statutory. So when we removed it, it's gone. Now the issue we have is character and one's heart. And so,
I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna come back at you on the defense to
absolutely
some of the stuff. Okay.
Absolutely. Now, don't attribute it to me.
Right. That's good.
Okay.
So you're right. There were systems put in place to, we'll say, seemingly level the playing field.
There you go.
Okay.
Right.
But my experience as a African-American male, having went through the educational system, having went through corporate America, having went through the hospital system, having went through the government system, if these rules, if these regulations, even if organizations implement policies and procedures, one would think going into those systems subsequently afterwards, and I'll give them a little wiggle room to adjust, to make adjustments, even though, whatever.
A little.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then if that in fact is or was the case, then for me, we don't see a George Floyd incident in 2020.
But
for me,
because now you're attaching corporate and business to police.
Well, they're all
I think those are two. Well, I think those are three separate.
Okay, so then you don't see the lack of Black and brown people in executive leadership positions, in mid-level leadership positions. Exactly. You don't see, you shouldn't see a vast difference in what education looks like in the public and urban school district versus the suburban school district.
The public suburban school district.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm thinking if the playing field is level, that should be uniform. That's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then too, yes.
But why isn't it level?
Because it still exists. What
still exists?
Racism.
And is it systemic or is it the person?
Well, here's where I'm going to go with that. I think it's systemic because if you can have, when did the civil rights movement come into play?
But it's illegal. Today, right. It's illegal.
Okay.
To be discriminatory is illegal.
Is to be illegal.
And I guess we should go back and go from racism to,
right.
I don't know, the discrimination. No, racism, prejudice, bias.
Right.
Okay.
You got a whole bunch of protected classes that fall into that.
Right.
Now, here's what we also got to look at. There's a this is just me from a mediation, putting on my HR hat. Oh my God, you can go so far to the line from a legality standpoint.
Oh, sure.
Which costs a lot of money.
But all those things are covered under law.
And I get that.
Right.
But I got to have a lot of money to be willing to go to the wall when there's things that are clearly biased, clearly discriminatory.
That's just how the system is, right?
It's just what?
That's just how the system is, right?
But is the system well?
Oh gosh, no.
Okay, then.
Not by any means.
Right.
And so I think what happens is we enter into a system that has been created by those in the legal profession to only play at a certain level and at a certain price. So I think it automatically predisposes those who do not have the income to afford the appropriate lawyer. I won't say decent, but appropriate lawyer. They can never really get any justice. And I think that's what people want. I don't even think people want to always let people off if they commit a crime. They want justice. And it's been said through studies that I've read in criminal justice and criminology, justice theory, that if a person feels they're treated justly, they're okay with the outcome. If they believe that there's been fairness and equity, they're okay with the outcome. And I think all of this shows, and I think it should be translated to people in law enforcement, in the public, in the community, in politics, legal, whatever, HR, healthcare, that there's no equity, that there's no fairness. And so my question to you is, which do we prefer? Do we prefer equity or do we prefer justice?
Well, it depends on what system you're working out of.
Well, such as?
Well, equity may be a corporate workplace term.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so equity can be seen as an equal seat at the table. Equity may be seen as the ability to listen, the ability to lead, the ability to be offered an opportunity, the ability to be able to feel and experience inclusivity. It can look different for different people, but I know that we have the ability to create an environment of inclusiveness, because I think when you talk about discrimination and you talk about racial inequality, that's mindset and behavior.
But isn't inclusivity making me feel like I'm included, but I don't really have to be included in any decision making? I don't have to have any titles. I think equity gives me an equal footing with everyone else.
Oh yeah, but equity can mean, Dr. Ken, we'll bring you in this board meeting as part of the discussion to do X. Inclusivity means we listen to you and take your input as equal as we accept everybody else's. Because I can bring you in and you don't have a voice.
But equity gives me that voice. Equity puts me on par with you.
No.
I think equity, I look at equity as the step beyond inclusion.
Okay.
That just because you include me and bring me into the meeting, that really doesn't help me. When I have an equal voice,
right,
people say equal vote.
I agree. I think I'm just interchanging the terms.
Right. So I think what we forget is we, older than that certain age, tend to look at things the way the younger generation does. It's this, or it's this, or it's this, when in fact it's also and. I need diversity, and I need inclusion, and I need equity. Equity shows me that you recognize the diversity and you're being inclusive by giving me an equal voice.
Right.
But I've been in those meetings where people talk over you, and the same way we do each other, mm-hmm. and for no reason. I mean, to the point where they'll turn their back on you while you're talking and just start talking to the person you're talking to as if you're not there. And that's happened so many times to the point where I've stopped talking in meetings. And so how do we get the voices of those that are legitimately protesting something they have disdain for, the death of an African-American man at the hands of a law enforcement officer? Mm-hmm. How do we get them to be heard?
Right. Great question. I think it starts with, again, to your point earlier, having an inclusive, meaning that we've got to communicate. So we got to communicate in some capacity to the decision makers, of starting with our local community, going to from our local community, going to our state, from our state, mm-hmm. going to our government, and even from the local community, going to our businesses, our organizations, and start having very real conversations with our employees, going into the educational system, having real conversations with our students. If we want the students, because out there marching and protesting are people who are employed, people who are entrepreneurs, people who are, all walks of life.
Right.
And so every one of them have a system or organization that allows them to be heard. Okay. Yes, the protesting in big, vast numbers internationally we've seen now, yes, is amazing. And that's getting the news coverage. The media is loving this, and that's getting published in all the different newspapers and journals and all of that. But beyond that, this needs to translate into some decision making.
Correct.
This needs to translate in some, how do we shift and change rules and laws, and so that there really is a level playing field.
Okay.
How do we shift mindsets? How do we have those type of conversations? And I think, and I heard someone mention this earlier today, is I think to be able to watch, because again, yes, we saw this incident with George Floyd, but over the years past, we've seen several incidents. Right. Okay. Was this one the straw? Because I've seen the outpour of this particular one look and feel totally different than the others.
I think change will come when we keep all that has occurred in perspective. I think that I say we as including me, we're raw, we're emotional, doesn't make us angry. But we need to figure out how best to change things. And what I'm hearing is only one-sided. And so people seem to think if you're not on the right side, well, then if you're not saying the right thing, but where does the responsibility of the community play a part in the future? Where does the responsibility, and I'm not saying responsibility legally, but in their actions and behaviors. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again. So we need a body of information that the community can understand about law enforcement to show that many of the things you're asking for, they're already done. Right. Many of those laws you're asking for are already on the books. Many of those things that you want cops to change, de-escalation and all those things, already trained. Diversity, inclusion, equity, already trained. The problem isn't even in hiring because there aren't enough. The problem is in the heart of the person. What transforms that person? What things can be plugged into a law enforcement agency that literally makes the officer not become so jaded as I had become, only because you don't get, I was at a meeting yesterday that a group of retired law enforcement and community members were in here in Milwaukee, and it was a 4-hour meeting. And one of the things one of the retired detectives talked about is police don't get sent to the birthday party. They don't get sent to hey, it's a graduation today, why don't you show up? They don't call 911 to come hang out. We only deal with the negative things of life. So over time, if you go to the same house enough, do the same things enough, you start to get jaded. And I think what agencies need are outside influences, not just connect with the community and work with the community, because we know that the problem is law enforcement is tied to the radio. So no matter how much I hang out with the kid or hand out baseball cards or hang out at the school, when someone calls 911, they give you X amount of minutes to get there. So we've become, the way we used to be, I don't know how old you are, but when I was growing up, where cops walk the beat, that's rare now because we need a call now. Less officers, less people getting hired. We really can't walk beats. We really can't get out and do things. And so at some point, there needs to be an understanding that the law enforcement officer needs to understand what the community is going through. But I think we need to show the community all of the rules, procedures, statutes, things of that nature, so that both are inclusive, both understand, oh, that's why you do that. Yes, that's why we do that. This is what the US Constitution says we can and can't do. This is what the law says we can and can't do. All those little nuances that I think if the public understood, they'll be very pointed and say, this needs to change, right? Instead of being so general.
So there's so to your point, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen
on both sides.
I think from a community, and every single community has different needs.
Correct.
In my community, interestingly, domestic violence is very real.
Oh, it's significant if you live in a suburb.
Okay.
It's just so,
right. and so a lot of education needs to happen. I think both law enforcement or that system understanding the communities of which they serve, but at the same time,
what makes you think we don't?
I'm just putting it out there.
Sure, but
why do I think we don't? Why do I think we don't?
Well, and others, sure.
Well, here's the thing. The reason I don't think there's an understanding is because it took, after about maybe the 10th time being pulled over when I lived in Brookfield, only to ask where was I headed, regardless of whether I was coming home or going.
Right.
And I know that's not the experience of my counterparts. But after about the 10th time of being pulled over, it took me calling the chief of police of Brookfield to say, correct, enough is enough.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, here's my issue with that. That should have happened the second time.
Right.
And so that is the education law enforcement can give the community so that there's a two-way thing. I think everything is one-sided. I don't think that's unfortunate at all. I just think once there's a two-sided thing, I think we can come up with more solutions that are really pointed to this is what the issue is.
Right.
The subculture of law enforcement explained to the community. The same way doctors have subcultures and lawyers have subcultures. Those are those things that only us do. Those type, they talk about the thin blue line, but doctors have a thin white line. And,
oh yeah. I get that, which is why it has to be ongoing education.
Right.
So I don't want to make the assumption that but you could have know what that is 5 years old.
Well, but that doesn't make it any less valid.
No, it doesn't make it any less valid, but change could have happened.
Well, change always happens. And I think that's what people don't understand. I don't think we look at each other I think when you ask a person what a law enforcement officer's job is, I don't think they really understand. I think they have what I like to call, and what the studies have called, common sense justice. Well, I think this is what they should do. Well, that's great, but here's what we actually do.
Right. But
these are the narrow parameters that we get to work in.
Mm-hmm. What would be good, Biz, is then you bring me to a point of, just from a creative side, is what would be ideal is, different documentaries on a day in a life as law enforcement, a day in a life from training to start to all what that looks like. And part of that being the education on some different things. I mean, on a couple of Sundays ago, where you educated me on a couple of things that should have been done, or I shouldn't look at it this way. Well, that's based on lack of understanding. So
Correct.
if you understand the system better, even as it relates to your own rights as a citizen, and the parameters that the officers or law enforcement work within, then I think you'll have more flexibility. There's at least a little bit of transparency in that process.
Right.
And I think it allows you then also to build trust.
And see, that's the weird part, because we got this wonderful thing in the state of Wisconsin called open records law.
Oh, I get that.
Where unless it's an ongoing investigation, you can make an open records request. They'll redact all the personal information and hand it to you readily. So I think the education
and you say that, but how many people know that?
Exactly. And so I think the education on the law enforcement side needs to be teaching the public, these are the rules and procedures. This is what the state law says. This is what the federal court says. This is what the U.S. Supreme Court says can and cannot be done. Now let's look at the community. You have people who, like anything, if you stay on the bad side long enough, because all you deal with are, and I'm not calling everybody criminals, I'm just putting that in quotes, because you get called to things when something bad is happening. That's where you live. And so now we need community, as well as trainers, to right the ship. Let's, and every now and then everybody, they've got studies that show after about 5 years, between 5 and 7 years in law enforcement, an officer goes through this old school thing that's called a Wyatt Earp syndrome. I can remember between 5 and 7 years, that's like a blind spot for me. You got it, you know what you're doing, you've done this enough times that it becomes repetition and part of your, daily activities. And then for about 2 years, you look back and go, whoa, where'd the year go? Because you were literally running on automatic. Ironically, those are the times when law enforcement officers are killed on traffic stops, domestic violence, because they have this thing in their head, I got this. And their awareness
goes down.
So then it becomes dangerous for the citizen and the officer.
So my mind thinks, based on, because I find it, just being in clinical in psychology, And so you deal with trauma and abuse and all that type of stuff on a daily basis. So you're listening and you're sometimes going through this with them.
Yep.
Every now and then, which probably, and I don't know if it does happen from a law enforcement standpoint, we need to do a reset on compassion, on empathy, and mental health.
Oh, we do. We have, after most critical incidents, I can say in the last 3 or 4 years, probably the last 10 years, we do a debrief. If there's a critical incident, for instance, there was one in the district where I worked, and an officer was injured. Another person has subsequently, I believe, had been killed. You know, it was like 1 or 2 things all at the same time, all churning at 2 or 3 things at one time. Afterwards, we debriefed with everyone in the district on the shift that responded to the call. If they did traffic control related to the call, dispatchers, the field inspector, everybody that was tied to it, shift commander, the clerks that were working, I'm sorry, office assistants. We brought them all in and we had a talk and we debriefed. And we were able to work through with some Milwaukee County mental health folks who came in, who are used to working with law enforcement and people working in public service. And we debriefed. And it took about 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to talk through, and those that needed assistance got referrals, and those that wanted to talk more made appointments. And those things are occurring more and more because you just can't carry it.
Right. And but here's the challenge. Here's the little small window I have.
Okay.
Is when we refer out for those who need a little bit more assistance, because I've done some debriefing before, and sometimes I think they need more.
But
sometimes,
you can't force a person.
No, I get that. I get that. I get you can't force the person to do that. But as a clinician,
mm-hmm.
I have made recommendations to employers that based on my interpretation of their mental health,
right,
they should not be doing this job.
Well, but you can't necessarily make that whole thing based on an instance.
Right now, they should not be doing this job right now.
Well, and so we have, there are, and I can only speak from my experience in law enforcement, there are indicators in place that when you do certain things, there's a progressive, what's the word I want to look, because it's not, we also have progressive discipline, but we also have ways of we have progressive monitoring of the things that occur in your life as an officer. So if so many things happen within a period, you're automatically called in and counseled. There's no, hey, let's wait around till Nick gets like 3 complaints of somebody hollering at. If they're the same timbre of complaint, you're gonna get called in. Hey Nick, like we've got 4 people that said you hollered at them. What's going on? Mm-hmm. And they make referrals and they go, we only have so much. As a supervisor, you can only go so far.
How well is that monitored?
What do you mean?
I hear you. I said, how well is that monitored?
Oh, there's a actual unit that's all they do. Like literally, that's all they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's automatic and it's automated by computer. So there are a lot of things that people don't know that are in place that when we try to explain it, we only want this one thing done. Nope, you got to do this. You got to do this. Well, that's great. But we've got all these things in place that will take care of that so that we follow up and so that the officer is looked at. And I'm not necessarily speaking for a police department, but I'm just speaking in general, that those things are built in so that when those things occur, if you have too many uses of force, if you have too many complaints, and I won't say too many, I just say if there's a number and you reach that plateau, it's automatic. The computer will spit out, hey, Nick, we got to talk to Nick. Nick's had this, and this in like a 3-month period, 2-month period. It's automatic. So many things are in place. I think law enforcement really needs to be authentic and open about, hey, this is what we have. This is what we do. People cringe at mental health.
So then I asked, but my question is when when you have this system in place,
Mhm.
how does a bad apple get through all of that?
Today, it's really difficult to, because once that system, and I'm speaking in general, I'm not speaking in specific. So if people want to know, they can go make an open records request and find out how all that stuff works.
Mhm.
But in general, once you've had a couple of hits, that goes towards your progressive discipline. So if we keep getting a number of those things, we'll tell you, hey, you keep doing this, you're going to get this. You're going to get an unofficial reprimand, then you may get an official reprimand, then you may get an actual, complaint filed, and you may have to take a day off without pay. Or, those things are progressive to the point up to and including termination.
Right. So what I hear, for those of you who are listening in, so I'm looking in two things. I'm asking these questions, but what I hear as a citizen that you're saying is, when you have an experience that you believe is a not so good experience
and good experience
and good experiences, it is worth commending, kudos, great job, I appreciate it, excellent. Or if it's this bad experience, writing and letting someone know.
Right.
Because absence of that, we can fuss and fuss and fuss and be upset and do whatever. If we don't send something to the source, then nothing goes anywhere. It's just, you're just kind of out there.
And equity comes, if you're going to complain about the bad, you need to commend with the good.
I agree.
And they do great things instead of, well, just doing your job. But right now, I think it's great to see police chiefs and supervisors and law enforcement officers recognizing that something's broke, that somewhere, and we don't know if it's training. And I honestly, being a state certified trainer, I honestly don't think it's training. I don't think it's a profession. I think it's a person's heart.
I agree.
And that until we deal with the sin nature of a person's heart, we're never going to change people. I know the same people that, like, one black and one white, who hate each other. It's completely race-based, but yet they both have families. They both have houses. They want to pay their taxes and have a nice neighborhood to live in. And I'm thinking to myself, what? And then you nail it down to something that happened 15 years ago. Because Nick said something to my kid, or Nick said something to my wife, and now I'm carrying it. And I'm going to carry it because I feel good and I'm mad, when in fact, and I think you said it best, we need to just sit down and have a conversation.
Because there's no testing for the heart.
Correct.
And in some cases, the mindset, some simple questions like, why do you want to be in law enforcement? And that answer be like based on what you hear, can be a disqualifying reason for them to be accepted. Because from a mental and I'm going mindset and the heart, because both kind of in tandem with one another, how we feel and how we think impacts, the feeling and emotion around it. And when you have that and there's no test around it, which is why which is why we've got it. Well, there is. How I see it is that, which is why it's so important if officers work together, and I'm assuming sometimes they do and sometimes they may not. But when you're working together, and it's a community, law enforcement is its own community. It's its own, what I would even say, fraternity. And within that community, everyone gets to know each other. So yes, there's gotta be some signs, some red flags, some things that we see and we know aren't right.
But what makes you think that law enforcement doesn't take care of those things?
I didn't say they didn't.
But that's the general assumption, because people go, oh, they don't, I've known a good number of law enforcement officers who have testified against other law enforcement officers, and they went to jail. And I think all of this could be addressed if we could probably remove the media from the equation. the stirring up of the negative things, not
Right.
showing the positive. Like if I only see negative things about African American males, when African Americans are always portrayed as being less than, being negative, not having, being poor. Like the only time I hear
Or
about,
aggressive.
well, but that's only when you're angry. And that was a joke.
Yeah.
When we're only portrayed a certain way, then we're only seen that way, it becomes normal. It becomes, wow, look there. Wow. And then I start picking up, well, wait a minute, Nick did the same thing that Ken did. So Nick must be like Ken. If Ken's a criminal, Nick's like that whole logic doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
But that's, the media will never show all the kids. We look at education as, oh my gosh, how much was it? What's the percentage of people who didn't graduate from high school? But what we don't do is show the percentage of people that actually graduated from high school.
Right. Even now with what's out there now,
Right.
they're in all honesty, and they're not portraying this, but there is more peaceful protesting.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But we're not highlighting that.
We're not even highlighting the people that are hollering at the people who are doing the rioting and the looting and telling them to stop.
Right. Because
but we'll show the woman.
That's not proper. That's not good news making propaganda.
Well, I'm not going to watch it unless there's something violent going on and something.
Right.
But we've even seen where trying to explain, when the police showed up and a group of people ran, they just grabbed the people that were there, detained everybody, and then found out what was going on. And they were hollering, "Let that woman go. She's helping defend the store owner." But they don't know that. You have to give them time to process what's going on first. Ironically, because the media recorded the entire thing, they were then able to see the entire depth of the interaction and saw that they let her go.
Right.
But how many times does that not happen like that?
Right.
You know, how many times have we not seen where people were detained and somebody I know just got a ticket for being out after curfew, but they worked where they were supposed to be out after curfew.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at some point we have to give people the benefit of the doubt. There was something I actually wrote down because I thought about you, Nick. It said, suspend judgment, assume positive intent. And I think sometimes with law enforcement, because it's been so contacts are always negative, we don't do that. It can be very dangerous in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see us going in the next 30 days?
In the next 30 days?
Yeah, will we continue to protest? Will we?
I think you'll see protesting continue. I believe you will see protesting continue in a much civil way, because I would think, to my point earlier, I think most of the protesting has been civil.
Yes.
And I think we will soon see that is gaining momentum, and that momentum in and of itself will also allow the opportunity for more discussions to happen, more very insightful conversations to happen. And you're seeing, I mean, just in a span of a week, I have seen more everything from, besides just community professionals, more people who do have a larger influence, right, come out in support of it. The thing here is we've got to be able to move the needle. And we've got to, and the needle, I don't believe the needle is going to move as fast as we would like it to move.
True. Well, we've had 401 years.
That's right.
We're still waiting.
And so it's not going to move as fast as we would like it to move.
Right.
But I think any acknowledgement and movement and continued conversation and movement in the right direction is helpful. Because I always say this, you can take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. You're still ahead.
True.
And if we acknowledge that is happening, then we can really start to see ourselves progressing in the right direction. But we've got to have some conversations, and part of this is that and I asked this question earlier, is that, and I believe this too, that for the most part, the majority of the system that we talk about in policing is doing an excellent job.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you have those bad apples, and those bad apples is what is glamorized, which is publicized, which is what we run with. And if we can take, even in some cases, some of the systems that you've already identified, even in this conversation, and look at our systems that we got in place, from education to training to whatever the system is that identifies these folks and what they're doing, and say, what can we do so the bad apples are lowered or we eliminate them?
But
What's
there's
the journey to that?
But I believe they're significantly low already. My unreadiness.
But one is too many.
But what about the public? Is one too many? And that's a horrible thing to say. But I think that the expectation that law enforcement is perfect is a misnomer that we just can't really get into. We're not. They are not. And so I think that expectation should come with the character of not what you do, but what you do afterwards.
Yeah.
I thought it was unfortunate that the 75-year-old man got pushed over, and that he fell and hit his head. And then I saw on the news crawl that they knocked him down and left him there. But you saw on the video where the officer stopped and went to go check on him, and his supervisor told him, no, move on. And then he stopped and got on the radio, and then they stopped the video. So they called for an ambulance and all of those things. I think it's unfortunate that we stopped showing that part, and it made them look very insensitive. They might have been insensitive, but I think we need to see those things, just like we see the bad and the good.
Right.
We need to recognize these are human beings, but we do hold you to a higher standard.
Well, and here's the thing. Just like I tell leaders are held to a higher level of professionalism and a higher standard, whether you want it or not, because that's the role we take on. Well, part of this, I think, also needs to be is that as law enforcement, unfortunately, just like leaders, you're held to, yes, a much higher standard.
Yep.
And part of that, I think, also should be empathy.
But is there room for mistakes, though? And that's the problem.
Right. Well, that's where you get into that fine line.
But we don't know how to separate one from the other.
Right.
We just make the assumption that all mistakes, you're a bad cop, get fired.
Right. Because even in that case where we talk about the cop that had George Floyd, he had his knee on him.
Right.
3 other cops were there and didn't do nothing.
But if I explain to you, like I explained the other day about culture, people then understood, and then they were upset why they only got charged with aiding and abetting. And so I went through the whole
I get that
understanding of subculture and what rules and procedures they have for senior officers when there's not a supervisor there. And odds are he was the senior officer. And I'm making a total assumption. So if you're the senior officer, guess what? They'll tell you, hey, dude, you need to stop doing that. But standard operating procedure says I'm kind of on the outs because he's a senior person.
I know,
and
but
that's unfortunate.
I was just going to say,
because they teach officer override that somebody should have walked over there, put their hands on his shoulders, and pulled him off. Now, at some point, till the culture changes, when people are comfortable doing that somebody, fire department, somebody should have went, no, dude, you got to get up. Sorry. Push him off if you have to. And I have to admit, I've gotten in some tussles with some cops who I thought, you don't need to do that. And luckily, I'm taller and usually bigger than most people, so I kind of went toe to toe. But
can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just holler.
I'm literally sitting here like I think I'm on, but okay.
Yeah.
Welcome, Noleta. How are you?
Sorry,
Hi there.
Been so late. It was a softball Sunday the first of many that will be coming my way.
Oh,
So
I'm sure. Hey,
yeah,
we'll just go live
At the
okay,
game.
at the game.
yeah,
She looking at us like, y'all crazy.
No.
Not gonna happen.
yeah. I don't think y'all want that because the softball crowd. Let me
You
tell
act
you,
like we don't have children.
we are not a calm people. We are.
Oh, I know that.
we
I know
are-
that. Is
we
this
are
AAU
hearing-
softball?
Yes, yes.
Oh, y'all crazy. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry.
It's real.
Wow.
It's real.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I
for
know it's
sure.
real.
So I would not even want to try to begin to have a conversation completely distracted because I'm trying to figure out who's coming first or if the girl was out.
And then the hit gets hit and then your phone goes.
Right.
Wow.
The joke is yesterday they played and Journey got a home run in a game. And so I was so excited that all I have is the hit and her getting the first base because I'm yelling so loud. The rest of the video is the ground. So I'm just saying right now, I don't know if I'm ready to go live at the games.
It sounds like someone needs some self-discipline.
Yes. Yes. I'll take it. I'll admit that.
Yeah. We were just discussing what ways can we balance the tables as it relates to, you know, we were talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and training, those types of things. How we can balance having law enforcement give the public information about what they do so the public will be more understanding instead of the general, well, I don't think this should happen, but not really having a basis for the argument. Recognizing how funding works for a law enforcement agency. I think it was something Nick brought up about, but anyway, we were talking about defunding and we never got to it. Then we went off this, you know, without you here to lead us, Noleta, we kind of went down a rabbit hole.
Right.
But it's
weird. I saw that post on defunding.
Yeah, when you explain to people, if you defund a police department, you have to recognize that 93% of their budget is just salary. No like extra, it's salary and fringe. That's it. Like they're like, so when you cut it, that's great. But now you're gonna cut officers. You're gonna cut, you know, everything else. 7% has to pay for gas, lights, electric, phone, cars, cell phone, all that. How do you, if you defund where and if you're already short, we're short firefighters, we're short law, you defund, then what? Like how?
It doesn't help the
take care of the
community.
city? It doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
I think
That's emotion.
Oh yeah.
I've certainly seen those signs and did not readily necessarily align with them, you know, seeing people say defund the police. And I'm like, albeit that I feel like there's definitely steps that need to be taken, I wouldn't necessarily say that that would be one of them, right? I did see that certain affiliates of police departments have cut ties now. Perhaps the people, when they say defund, maybe that's something that they're insinuating. What I mean by that is, so I saw in Minneapolis, one of the things that they're doing is, I think the football team, one of the stadiums there that utilizes officers has come out and said they're going to sever ties. So if you're talking that sort of thing where affiliates, not necessarily you're cutting into their budget, but these extras, right? If that's what the signs truly mean, then, you know, hey, depending on where you stand on the issue, what, you know, these organizations, that might be a step that they want to take to show solidarity, to show that they want to put their money where their mouth is, and no longer utilize the services of those police officers. And I can't say that anything is wrong with that. They have the ultimate right to choose that if that's what they want to do. But I think that's separate and apart from defunding the police as an institution, you know. And
looking at it, I think I saw on inside higher education or something. I don't, it may be the wrong one. I was looking, I get a number of updates each day, and they were talking about school districts are looking to, sever their ties with the police. And I circle back to, you might want to consider why you have the police there in the first place. And
I would imagine that they would engage a different sort of private security or something like that. I wouldn't say they would discontinue their relationship with the police and then not have any sort of securide. Right. My thought would be that they would discontinue the police and use a security service. And so that could be, I've long thought, for some of these urban schools and you have officers set to patrol them, it's nice to have people that look like them, right? So if you're saying that you want to go a different way and maybe hire a security team that is of the same background as the students in your population, what's wrong with that? I feel like it's taking a different look at it. You're right. I think it's just taking a different look at it. And so I think we have to be creative. This is the time for creativity. This is the time to figure out solutions to the problems that have been plaguing us. And so I am encouraged by all of the organizations that have come out. I mean, organization after organization. I know my organization released a statement. Northwestern Mutual released a statement. All you got to do is go on LinkedIn and you can find any and all organizations that have released a statement. And it's wonderful to see. But now we can only talk about it for, what I mean? Let's not only talk about it, let's be about it. So what sort of action and implementation are you working on, Northwestern Mutual? Are you working on Johnson Controls? Are you working on Medical College of Wisconsin to now see how you can bridge some of these disparities that we know exist? We're acknowledging this, right? Everybody's raising their hands saying we acknowledge the disparity. Right. What's your plan? How are you planning to execute and rectify some of this?
Well, I'd like to look at then what were you telling me up until this point? Because you were telling me you were already doing this up to this point. And now you're saying that you're recommitted to something that you've never really done anyway. And I'm not necessarily talking about those particular organizations, but I've been hearing this for 40 years.
And what you just said is as my grandmother would say, the gospel truth. That right there.
So what are you talking about? Well, we're devoted to. Well, you're really not, because when I look around, your leadership doesn't show it. Your managers don't show it. Your directors don't show it. Your VPs
your C-suite doesn't show it. Your list of board of directors may show it a little bit, but it's definitely that's that checkbox mentality, right? As long as we have one or two, as long as we have our, I hate to say this word, but it's not my word, public. So understand, but you got your token, right? We got our one or two token box check people to say we have a woman, we have a man, and of color normally is what it is. And that's our checkbox. We've done it.
We got Asian and we're done. We got Latinx, we got Asian, and then we're done. When you look at the board and when you look at the people that vote, people that make up not so much.
How are you giving people opportunities within your organization and grooming them to become that manager, senior manager, director, any of those things? And not only people, but people of color. If you're truly invested in bridging this gap, like you say you are, what are you willing to do to help get us there? You can't just say,
yeah, but then I got to train them. I got a person here that already knows it. They understand it. They can hit the ground running. So
I don't necessarily think that's the case always. And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
sort of sorry.
You're never sorry.
But you know what? It's interesting that and I'm always going to go back to this. When we're changing and we're shifting and folks are putting the statements out, I want to hear your why.
Yeah, but we've heard that since 1968. We've heard that. We're doing this because we think it's the right thing. The way to make money. How many times have you heard the way to make money? You have to have a diverse sales force. You have to have this because you have multiple
And your why,
Branding.
your how, and why now. Your why, your how, and your why now. And how is that, what is that going to look like for me this time next year?
It'll probably look the same that it looks now.
90 days.
Well, you haven't changed in 40 years.
Absolutely.
My expectation.
Why should I believe you, and why should I care today?
So I was listening to a, I'm trying to think of the name of the program, and it's escaping me at the moment. And they said it on this program, and I think even Nick, you said this before. I think last week when we were talking about this, and you said this feels different, and that seems to be the emotion that everyone is displaying. Like everyone is seeing, like this is something about this. It feels different, and so yes, we've been getting lip service, but I will say this is the first time in my lifetime that I've seen so many organizations come together, these large companies, and say, hey, we acknowledge. Because the first step to it's almost like AA. The first thing is admitting you have a problem.
But they've admitted that in the past. So they've said it, they've written it, they've got all these wonderful things written in HR. Everybody goes through the training every year, and then nothing happens.
But I'm saying specifically towards systemic oppression, the plight of Black people. I'm right now today, like this has not been done before. Like right now today, you see people saying the words. They ain't tiptoeing around it.
Noleta, I know you're only 20 years old. I know that. But
I'll take it. I'll take that.
I knew you would. We've heard this before. I've watched this going through college. I've watched it when I worked at Tribune Company. I've watched there's always a reason why it's never quite you. Some little thing, some little reason why you can't get a raise, some little reason why you can't get this job, when it's gotten old. And so now my question is, your generation needs to push, okay, now we're doing, where we going? What's step 2? My generation should go, you didn't do that in the past. What makes me think we should believe you in the future?
Right.
I think
that's kind of where I'm at.
And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that now you're getting hit by 5 generations.
Right.
That are
and I'm listening.
You lied.
I'm listening, and I'm asking myself, do I believe this, or do I believe I'm going to get those statements? I'm going to see all of the very intentional propaganda that's coming out. And then behind the scenes, we're just going to try to find a way to get a whole lot more covert.
We have a really good friend.
Lord, I hope not.
The word, what people say, is more important. I'm a do person. You could talk to me till you're blue in the face.
Show me.
Do it. Otherwise, it doesn't mean it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so you are, and rightfully so. And I think that's why the protests haven't let up. I think people are truly pushing for real change. I want to see something different. And Nick, to your point, I think the difference is the word opportunity. It's the simple fact that people and persons of color have not been given the same opportunities, have not been given that chance to, we're gonna try you out and see what, it's not been something that has been readily available to us. And so I think that if we are the people leading this conversation, what we need to be saying is, what are you planning to do? What are you going to do? Show me a succession plan that involves African Americans, people of color. Show me some training. Show me an intentional training program, not one that, hey, you can go and take this, I-Lead class and get this under your belt.
And we'll consider you.
Yeah, no. Show me a direct path to the next level. And so And it's not that you want to give someone undeserving something, but you want to give the person who has the ability to do it, the ability to do it. But too often, you know, as you mentioned, Dr. Harris, it's always those little reasons why you weren't the, you know, the selected person, why you just didn't quite measure up, or why you weren't the best fit. And I know we've all heard that, whatever that means. So if you're as intentional as you're saying, if your words are so heartfelt, like you put them together so eloquently in these statements that are being released, now I need to see what you're planning.
Right.
And so I would love for the next. Go ahead, Nick.
Go ahead. No,
I
I
was going to say, I would love for the statements to be, this is what we plan on doing. You know what I mean? I would love, hey, this is, we developed the task force. And we're going to target A, B, and C. I know you don't want to see another task force.
And I'm not interested in metrics.
Nope. No numbers.
I don't want to see no more numbers, because we can make the numbers look like what we want them to look like.
Yep.
I
think between us, we got what, 6 degrees that can probably show how that's wrong? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't need to see numbers. I want to see where I want to see it is, I want to feel it and I want to see it. And when people are able to feel it and see it, then you've made a mark. Because what did you tell me, Dr. Ken? When did the civil rights movement come out?
1968. We still
okay. And they said it's a law, right?
And actually, the first time was 1965. But
okay,
you know, they had to kick it until about.
We already got stuff on paper.
Yep.
So that's not gonna move me.
So last question, because we so far out over time, I'm telling you.
Oh yeah, because I got to get on another call.
What can be done to make everything that was said, all of those statements, to be operationalized and actualized?
By having a plan, having people in the room that the voices that you need to hear in the room when these plans are being made, getting the same group of people together to come up with a plan to handle an issue that's been going on prior to you coming along, and since been going on since you've been the person on the team, to me says that you don't have the right answers. So maybe we need to be talking to the people in which this affects so that we can get the right change to happen. And so it's going to take listening to the voices of the people, listening to the voices of the employees who you say you stand in solidarity with. Understand their needs, understand what they are looking for, understand how you could bestly you could execute a plan to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. You have to be willing. But yeah, you have to be. Again, I appreciate the heartfelt statements. Some of them are outstanding. And I'm thinking that's great. Now tell me what you're going to do. And not only tell me what you're going to do, but I need to know that this plan that you're telling me that you're going to execute, you listen to the voice of your people to execute. This ain't something where you got all your C-suite together and said, hey, what y'all think? And there's no diversity in the room. There's no Black people in the room. And somehow y'all gonna put y'all heads together and come up with the solution. It's just not gonna work that way.
It's gotta start from the bottom up.
You have to listen to the needs of people. If you're going to meet the needs, you have to listen to them first. You have to have their voice in the room.
Very well said. Nick?
Oh, I'm good.
Nailed it.
You can shut it down.
Nailed it. I think it's just important that my generation is silent because we've heard this before. And I may not agree with the looting. I may not agree with the breaking windows. I think that's an atrocious act to do in order to get to be heard. But at some point, you have to recognize that this was created, and the only way to fix it, you're going to have to actually actualize something. You have to actually put it in operation.
Yeah.
I'm taking Noleta's words beyond. I don't want to hear your plan. I want to see what you do. Not doing, not telling me what you're going to do. I need to see it happen.
Yep.
And until then, I think the protests are going to be there.
Yep.
For quite a while. I don't think the winter's going to slow it down at all.
I don't either.
COVID didn't slow it down, so you already know.
Absolutely.
Very true.
COVID
shut
didn't
it down.
slow it down.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks for making it, Noleta. Appreciate it.
The nick of time. In the nick of time.
Appreciate it. Nick, I don't know what to say. We were duking it out pretty good.
Oh.
We were duking it out pretty good. Every time I said something, he countered it. Every time he said something, I countered it back and forth. We were internally, we were crying, where's Noleta? So
I can't wait to go back and listen to the Duke Fest then.
What? Did I accidentally hit record? Oh well.
I see it.
God bless you guys. Take care. Be safe.
Happy Sunday, everyone.
Hello to the families.
Take care, y'all.
I'll see you next week.
Yep.
Bye.
All right. So thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here, and we will see you on next week.